Thank you for joining us this evening for what we believe is going to be a really fantastic webinar. Tonight's webinar, Mental Health Ministry, a Catholic Response to the Mental Health Crisis, is being brought to you by the St. Cloud Diocese Mental Health Ministry team. And I've got many of those team members joining us tonight. I'm going to invite them to go ahead and turn their cameras on so you can see who are some of the members of this team so that you know who you can reach out to in the future if you have further questions or want to get more involved. So this is our team. Thank you, team, for joining us, and thank you all for being with us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kateri. I am the Director of Social Concerns for Catholic Charities of the Diocese of St. Cloud, and am one of the members of the Diocesan Mental Health Ministry team. For more information about this team, I am going to go ahead and put the Mental Health Ministry website address into the chat. So I invite you, after tonight's webinar is done, go ahead and take a look at that website if you haven't already. It's got some great resources, some more information about this team, and again, how you, your faith communities, your communities in general can get involved in mental health and helping our community thrive. Before we jump into our presenter, I do have a few housekeeping announcements for us. First of all, please note that this webinar is being recorded. As participants, everyone's cameras and microphones are turned off except for the Mental Health Ministry team, just so that you could get to know them a little bit, but you don't need to worry about that. You are muted, cameras are off. If you have questions throughout the evening, and we hope that you do, and we hope that you'll share them, if you have questions, we invite you to put those in the Q&A feature. And that is just like it sounds. It says Q&A. It should be on most Zoom screens. It will be along the bottom menu bar, pretty close to the center there. So you can enter those questions at any time. Members of our team will be monitoring those questions and be asking Deacon Ed, our presenter, those questions at a few times throughout the evening. So he does welcome your questions. So please go ahead and ask those again in that Q&A feature as opposed to the chat. The webinar is scheduled to go until about 8:30, but there will be a break about halfway through. Again, thank you for being with us this evening. And now I'm going to turn it over to Scott, who will introduce our presenter for the evening. Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Kateri. It's my pleasure to be able to welcome Deacon Ed here to our webinar in St. Cloud. I've been able to work with him in the past on work with mental health advocacy and suicide prevention. A little bit about Deacon Ed. Ed Shoener was ordained a permanent deacon in 2004 and serves at St. Peter's Cathedral in the Diocese of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Shoener is a founding member of the Association of Catholic Mental Health Ministers and the Catholic Institute of Mental Health Ministry at the University of San Diego. He serves on the Council on Mental Illness of the National Catholic Partnership on Disability. Deacon Shoener, along with Bishop John Dolan, is co-author of the books Responding to Suicide, a Pastoral Handbook for Catholic Leaders, and When a Loved One Dies by Suicide, both from the Ave Maria Press out of Notre Dame. He, along with family and friends, founded the Katie Foundation after his daughter Kathleen died by suicide in 2016. Katie's obituary went viral because it spoke to the needs and concerns of people who live with mental illness. Deacon Ed lives with his family in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and a warm welcome to Deacon Ed.
Yeah, and I'm Deacon Ed Shoener from the Diocese of Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I'm glad that to be here. I'm up in St. Cloud. I'm not actually in Scranton, Pennsylvania tonight. So it's nice to be here. I'm Scranton, Pennsylvania. I always joke, for those of you Office fans, that is a real place that really does exist. And that's our latest claim to fame. I'm also the president of the Association of Catholic Mental Health Ministers, which is a relatively new association that's promoting and encouraging the development of mental health ministries within the Catholic Church. We've been around, we're just brand new in the life of the church, just 4 or 5 years. But I think it's a ministry that the Holy Spirit's definitely moving in and is encouraging people to join in this ministry to bring the love of Christ in the lives of people who are struggling with mental illnesses and mental health challenges, as well as their families who support them. So that's just about all of us. I think it's always good to start with a prayer. So here's a prayer. Some of you may know that Saint Dymphna is the patron for those who live with a mental illness. And I'll get into her story a little bit more later on. But this painting here shows Saint Dymphna clinging to the cross of Christ and looking into the light of Christ from the darkness and the suffering that may come often with mental illnesses. And the saying here is that the pain is real. Sometimes people wonder if the pain of mental illness is real, but it is a real illness. But so is hope, and that's the basis of mental health ministry, and what we try to offer in this ministry with is hope. So we'll begin with this prayer in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Lord, we pray for those who have a mental illness. Help us understand that the way we talk about people with a mental illness affects the people themselves and how we treat the illness. So often people who have a mental illness are known as their illness. People say that she is bipolar or he is schizophrenic. When we talk about mental illness, we should not use that phrase. People who have cancer are not cancer. Those with heart disease are not heart disease. Let us always remember that people with a mental illness are not the illness. They are beautiful creations of God. There is so much fear, ignorance, and hurtful attitudes that the people who live with mental illness needlessly suffer further. Our society needs to provide resources to understand and treat mental illness. Help us support and be compassionate to those with a mental illness every bit as much as we support those who suffer from any other illness. Grant courage to those for whom we pray and fill them with hope. Help them to remember you love them. They are never alone. Saint Dymphna, patron of those with a mental illness, pray for us. Holy Spirit. So I think the first thing, as I alluded to just a couple of seconds ago, is that if we're not affected by a mental illness directly ourselves, we know and love someone that is affected with a mental illness. This is a basic statistic here that 1 in 5, about 20% of American adults at any one time live with some sort of diagnosable mental health condition. And over the course of a lifetime, 50% of us will experience some type of diagnosable mental health condition. And you see in that little yellow box there down at the right, quite often these illnesses and mental health conditions come on at a very young age, or at least they start to come on at a very young age, as early as 14. About half of those people who develop a condition can start as early as 14. So the scope and burden of mental illness is enormous in our society. We're all affected by this. Catholic, Buddhist, doesn't make any difference what your religion is or what your spiritual background is. We're all affected. This illness is an equal opportunity affliction for many, many people. And I think it's important to remember that it's not them, some other group of people, but it's us. All of us in one way or another are affected by a mental illness. So in this ministry, I think it's important to remember, I've been doing this now for a few years, and there seems to be 3 main concerns that people who either live with these illnesses or mental health conditions or those who support them express when they come to the church. They wonder whether or not church leaders really understand these illnesses. Do we get it? Is it something that we're prepared to be able to talk about? Is it something that we've experienced? And that's important that we be able to address that concern. The second concern is that we will judge them. We'll say things like, well, you have depression because you're not praying enough, or you have anxiety because you're not turning it over to Jesus enough. Or if someone has died by suicide, perhaps we'll say, well, that person's in hell. There's this fear of this judgment and stigmatization, which is not what the church teaches. But there is nevertheless this concern that there is that there'll be a judgment, which keeps people from wanting to interact and get involved and bring these mental health conditions into to their church leaders and clergy because they're worried about this type of judgment. Like I said, it's not the teaching of the church, but nevertheless, quite often they experience this. And the third concern is there support in the church for people who live with mental illnesses? Is there a mental health ministry? We can say now, yes, there is at least one starting. There's certainly one here in the Diocese of St. Cloud that's getting started, but it is a relatively new ministry in the church. And so it's important that we get the word out that this ministry is available in the church. Our goal for many of us involved in this ministry is that one day the mental health ministry will be as common in the life of the church and every other parish as youth ministry is or as grief support ministry is, that it's just sort of a common ministry that's just a given, that parishes support people with those of us that live with mental health conditions. And it will be a common ordinary ministry. And the Catholic Church, it would be wonderful if at someday the Catholic Church was known as the place you go when you have a mental health condition or a mental health challenge, where you go for the type of spiritual support you need and for the care that you need, and you find a wonderful, open, and loving church community that can support you. We're not there yet, but hopefully someday we'll get there where we will be known as that type of a church. So we need to be able to talk about our mental health. It's okay to tell our stories. Quite often there's a word in the mental health business, so to speak, of it's called self-stigmatization. We don't like to acknowledge our own mental illnesses and our mental health conditions. We don't like to get treatment. We certainly don't want other people to know about it. But, as a church leader, I'm a deacon, as other clergy and other church leaders out there, we need to be able to get to the point where we can show people that it's okay to talk about a mental health condition. No one's going to think less of you. For example, I live with depression. I'll be showing you in a minute some more information about my daughter, Katie, who Scott mentioned at the beginning that had died by suicide. She had bipolar disorder. But, we'd have no trouble talking about it if we had a bad back or a relative experience a cancer of some kind. We need to get to the point where it's okay to tell our stories about mental health conditions. So one of the things I like to do is take a couple minutes to tell you my daughter Katie's story. And there's a picture of her. Was a beautiful young woman. Of course, believe she still very much exists. I mean, when someone dies by suicide or in other ways, means they don't kind of like disappear. They're still, our Catholic faith tells us they very much still exist, and they're very much in the loving arms of Christ and are still have not disappeared into the ether. So Katie is still very much exist. In fact, I have a close relationship, I would think, in many ways, a spiritual relationship, of course, with her. But she was a beautiful young woman, and our medical school in Scranton has, I have to thank them for this. I'll show this to you in a minute here. Did a little film about Katie and her story and our family's experiences of Katie with the mental illness and dying by suicide. And it saves me from having to repeat this story over and over again. Although I am quick to say that I do talk about it, and I can get emotional about it at times. As the years go by, it gets a little easier to talk about it. But I will say it's okay to talk about it. And I also am quick to tell people, if you're uncomfortable watching a 60-some-year-old guy tear up and start to cry a little bit when tell this story, all I can say is just, get over it, get used to it. There's nothing wrong with tearing up and crying a little bit. That's perfectly fine. But like I said, the medical school has saved me a bit by having this beautiful little film about Katie. And I think it's a good way to introduce this topic of mental health and mental illness into the life of the church, into this discussion as to where it should be within the life of the church. So let me show you this film. It's a couple minutes long.
If you go to the more,
Salutatorian at Scranton High
Oh,
School.
that's not.
yeah, and then optimize for video clip.
I did that.
Oh, you did already?
Mhm.
Okay, I couldn't hear.
It's not, the sound is not coming out?
It wasn't.
Okay.
High school. She was the freshman sensation on her soccer team, president of her National Honor Society. She was dating boys, and it was a wonderful time in her life, at least to all outward appearances. Katie first experience with the mental illness probably started before we as parents knew. This mental illness was causing all sorts of anxieties for her, and she was cutting on her arm, and she would cover it with her bracelets. This is when she was a senior in high school. We didn't know what to make of it because we had no experience in mental illness. The response when she came back to high school was just this silence. I don't think anybody was deliberately being mean or setting us aside. It's just that our friends and family and other people at the school don't know what to say. It took us a long time to begin to understand what this mental illness is, what bipolar disorder is. We had never heard of it. She always took her medicine. She always took it seriously. It's a lot of hit or miss with these medicines, but she stuck in there for a long time. But finally, at the end, the last year, nothing was working. They were just throwing the medicine cabinet at her. She just became so terribly, terribly, painfully depressed, and she tried to pull herself out of it. The depression just overwhelmed her. She died from suicide in August 3rd, 2016. So I thought it would be good just to simply say this is what happened. She had a mental illness and she died from suicide, but to recognize it as an illness, not as a character flaw or a moral failing or anything like that. It apparently spoke to what a lot of people with mental illness experience, and this obituary went viral.
This is a unique medical school because no other medical school has made behavioral health in collaboration with its community its #1 priority.
The Behavioral Health Initiative is a wonderful initiative that we at the Katie Foundation have been supporting because it brings the treatment of mental illness into the community.
If you think about many of these issues and problems as being brain disorders, biologically based, strong genetic factors, then that's going to help remove the stigma that's been associated with having behavioral health problems, psychiatric problems.
There's so many misconceptions about people that have a mental illness. Mental illness is an illness like all the other illnesses that doctors treat, and it needs to be understood that way.
The goals of the curriculum would be provide the tools and the awareness and the expertise to help integrate behavioral health into the physical healthcare world so that it is seamless and it is just a matter of fact that those two problems will be addressed together.
And that's what I like about the BHI. It'll be integrating the care of people with a mental illness into the broader community in many, many different ways, and that's a great thing.
And I think that's a good way to move into this topic a little more deeply, is that mental health ministry is a good way to integrate the spiritual care, the spiritual life, and helping people with mental illnesses into the broader life of the church. So just as we need in the secular world to integrate mental health care into the healthcare system more broadly, we also need to start doing this more specifically or more broadly within the church. So that's my story, and I hope all of you can start to think about your stories. We all need to tell our stories. The prayer that we read at the beginning, the Saint Infinite prayer, is basically my Katie's obituary, just slightly adapted to be a prayer. So as you can see, we were quite open about her her mental illness and her suicide, because we thought it was important that our community know about it. And I think all of us can do things like that to be more open about our conditions and our challenges. And these are some of the things that Scott, as I mentioned in the video, and as Scott had mentioned early on, Katie's obituary, much to my amazement, neither Katie or any kind of celebrity went viral at the time when she died, and we heard from thousands, tens of thousands of people. And these are some of the things they said, which I think really ring true. We need to be able to discuss the realities of struggling with a mental illness, because sometimes it can be as terminal as any other illness. We need to chip away at the stigma of mental illness. I've never understood why we treat people with a mental illness differently than people with a physical illness. And I hope, and I think this third bullet is correct, that God is using this for good divine purpose, to educate others to be compassionate. And I'm sure many of you who will be getting involved with mental health ministry will come to realize this, that God can turn everything to the good. Even the evil of suicide is not the end. God will overcome everything and turn it to the good and use it to support others and to help others as they struggle, as I've found has been my experience. So I would ask you to think about this. What is your story? And are you willing to share your story and let God use it for the good? Maybe think about that, particularly if you're clergy or if you're a leader in your community. How would you, you don't have to wear it on your sleeve all the time, but when it was appropriate, how would you be able to discuss perhaps your own mental health challenges of depression or anxiety, or maybe those of your family or a friend or a good relative that perhaps died by suicide? Are you ready to discuss that and share that with other people and let God work through you, as broken as we all are, but to let God work through you to share that story and in a way let people know that by you sharing that story that you understand, and as someone who's seen as a representative of the church, that the church understands that story. So I would encourage all of you to think about that, to think about what your story is and how, if you're willing to, or how you're willing to let God share your story for the good. So let's spend a couple minutes thinking about mental illness and what it is, and how we as a church community can begin to wrap our heads around this. Now, I'll say this a number of times through this presentation. We are not called to be mental health professionals or specialists in any way. We're ministers. But we need to understand what mental illness is. Mental health are health conditions, changing thinking, emotion, and behavior, or all of these things at one time. And it can really cause distress and problems functioning, holding down a job, maybe put tremendous stresses on the families and personal relationships. And I think this is important from a ministerial point of view. It can disrupt our relationship with God. Our distorted thinking, our depression, our anxieties, or maybe even more serious illnesses that involve psychosis and things such as that, that it can disrupt a person's relationship with God. And that's why it's so important we provide the spiritual care to let people always know that they're loved by God, that they're loved by the church, and that they can always be in a relationship with God despite what the illness might be telling them. And the other thing to keep in mind is that mental illness is treatable. Most people with mental illness continue to function in their daily lives quite well. I'll be quick to add that the treatment isn't anywhere near what it needs to be yet, the medical care for mental illness. I think that's in large part because of the stigma associated with it, that we need to pour more money into research and understanding these illnesses and coming up with better treatments for it. But nevertheless, there are treatments out there that do quite well. My daughter, Katie, always availed herself of therapy and psychiatric medicines. And I always say it's similar to someone who's on chemotherapy with cancer. Chemotherapy might not cure every cancer, but it certainly can keep people alive much longer than if they weren't taking chemotherapy. And I would say in my daughter Katie's case, the medicines kept her and treatments kept her alive. We had her for much longer than we would have had her if she didn't have the mental health care. She died way too young, but I'm certain she would have died at a much younger age by suicide if we didn't have this type of care that was available to her. So it is treatable, and it's you never lose hope. You can always find hope, and certainly you're a good Catholic if you get mental health care and take psychiatric drugs as prescribed. And you know, good St. John Paul II, who wrote on many, many things. He had a long pontificate and had a deep understanding about this. And one of his famous documents, Faith and Reason, talks about this, that faith and reason, including science, leads to the truth. So we can use medical science to better understand ourselves and other people and help people with this knowledge. And to always remember this, that Christ took all human suffering on himself, even mental illness. Whoever suffers from mental illness always bears God's image and likeness in himself, as does every human being. So Christ took mental illness to the cross with him. He took on all human suffering and redeems it. So we can always know that Christ understands whatever we're going through, whatever our mental health challenges or conditions are, and that we can use the science of psychiatric and psychological care to help that. That too is a gift from God. The good medical care is something that God gives us to help manage and treat these illnesses. So faith and reason go together, and particularly in the field of mental health care. So it's important that not that so much that we become professionals in mental illnesses, but we have a certain amount of mental health. I would use the term mental health literacy. You know, if someone said to you they had a physical illness, you would say, well, okay, what kind of physical illness? And they would tell you cancer versus multiple sclerosis versus a bad back. You'd have some notion of what they're going through. You could talk to them about it. You could better accompany them if you have an understanding of the illness they're going through. The same is true with mental illness. Not all mental illness is the same thing. If someone tells you and discloses to you that they have a mental illness, well, it's important that you at least have some sense of what the illness is that they're dealing with, because these illnesses manifest themselves in different ways. Certainly each individual can experience them in a different way. These are just some, and I won't go through all of these in any great detail. We don't have the time for that now, but just to give you a sense of how many different types of mental illnesses there are. They're treated in different ways, either with different types of psychiatric medicines. They're treated in different ways with different types of therapies. So mental illness is not just one thing. It's a wide variety of very different things. And you know, you can easily, there's many sources out there to get a sense of what these illnesses are. And I think as Catholic leaders, we can do things to increase our literacy as when someone discloses to us what the mental illness is. The other thing I think to keep important in mind as a Catholic leader is that the mental health care, the care for people with mental illness, as I mentioned earlier, has a ways to go yet. It's much better than nothing for sure, and it certainly helps many people in many different ways. But it's not quite where it needs to be yet. So I think it's important for people to understand you don't take a blood test to find out what type of mental illness you have. Unlike, for example, different types of cancers or other physical illnesses. You don't take any sort of physical test. There's some research going on in that area, but at this point, that's not a commonly used diagnostic tool. The main way mental illnesses are identified is by the person's behavior, how they describe what they're thinking, what their symptoms are. And so it's very much in the very early stages of coming up with any sort of quantifiable diagnostic test. It's more this like a talk-based analysis of what's going on. And I think that's an important thing for people to remember, that the diagnosis and treatment of mental illness is still in its very early stages compared to like what cancer was 50 or 100 years ago. So it's important too, when we talk about mental illness, and I'll show you this little film clip here in a minute. It's a little snarky, but I think it's an important way to bring this point home, is that words are important. We talk about mental illness, oftentimes we can say absurd things to people with a mental illness. And this little clip here highlights the fact that the absurd things that we say to people who live with a mental illness, we would never say to someone who lives with a physical illness. So let me show you this clip to drive this point home, and then I'm sure you'll find it, I don't think anyone will find it insulting, but hopefully you'll find it a bit amusing.
And I was like, yeah, right, man. Oh! Oh, my head.
Please don't complain. It'll ruin the vibe.
Just
It's like you're not even trying to walk.
Have you ever tried not having diarrhea?
God, my migraine is killing me.
You take meds for that?
No! Oh my God, dude! I cut myself and it looks really, really bad! Some people have it way worse than you do. You gotta chill out.
So I guess you're not going out with us tonight. Again. You're such a flake.
Oh man, I really think I sprained it this time. I gotta go see my physical therapist.
You go to therapy?
Yeah?
Whatever, weirdo.
Can you hold on 1 second?
Honestly, your attitude sucks.
Ugh.
You taking another insulin shot?
Yeah, I kinda have to.
Have you ever thought about dropping the pharmaceuticals and fighting this the natural way?
My diabetes?
Enough is enough. It's a beautiful day, man. It's time to get up.
Dude, I just got eye surgery.
Yeah, like a week ago.
Well, it still hurts.
Ooh, I think your friend hurt himself.
I need help.
Nah, he's fine.
So I think that drives home the point in a kind of a, a humorous way, that we can say things, and I've done this in the past. We've all seemed to say things that reflects our misunderstanding and ignorance about mental health conditions, and we need to be sensitive to that. Because I can tell you right now, after being in mental health ministry now for a number of years and working with people that live with these mental health challenges, they are very sensitive to this. They're very well aware of the stigma and the things that people say to them. And that's one of the reasons they don't disclose it to us, is because they just know that there's this lack of literacy, of awareness of mental health conditions. So this is something I got off that I've been using for a couple of years now in these presentations. 10 things you should never say to a Catholic with mental illness. It's a great little piece that was put together by a woman named Brooke Gregory back a couple of years ago, and I'd encourage you to go look it up on the web. But I'll just highlight a couple of the points that she made in her article. Is this that one of the worst things you can do is to trivialize a mental illness by saying things that are not true, that everything gets better with prayer. It doesn't. I wish I had some sort of deliverance prayer or something like that that would make the schizophrenia go away or the bipolar disorder go away, but that doesn't exist, or that it's as easy as giving it to God, that somehow it's a mentally ill person's fault. It never is. Having an illness is an illness, and that we need to stop and think before we speak and think about what the impact our words are going to have on that person. Like that little film just showed us. We wouldn't say things to people with cancer or diabetes that we all too often say to people with a mental illness. The second point here is that mental illness is every bit as real and serious as a physical illness. Don't say anything to a mental illness person that you wouldn't say someone that has a serious physical illness, because the truth is mental illness can't be understood by dealing with sort of pious phrases and quotes from the saints or anything like that. Mental illness is an illness. I want to be quick to add that just like with any other physical illness, prayer helps us and accompanies us in the suffering to reassure that God's with us and has not abandoned us. But that in and by itself is not a cure. It's a way to accompany people and support them, but it's not a cure. The most important thing to do is, if you really want to help a person with a mental illness, is get to know them, and if necessary, help them seek and get good professional care. Listen to them, even though sometimes maybe things that they have to say because of their illness might be difficult to understand and difficult to accept. But listen to them, pray with them. Prayer it's always good to be joined together with God, with someone. Empathize with them and let them know you will support them with your prayers. That's the main thing in the spiritual life and the spiritual care of folks, those of us that live with mental health challenges, is that we need to know that we're loved. Sometimes we doubt. It's hard, maybe people that don't live with these illnesses to understand this, but sometimes we doubt that God really cares about us. The depression and some of these other symptoms of these illnesses can really distort our thinking. So it's always good for someone to wrap their arms around them, so to speak, in a spiritual way, and let them know that they are loved and that they're supported. So what I'd like to do is get a little bit into this issue of what the church can do to help support people with a mental illness. And this is the best document that I've seen out there to date that a leadership body within the church has put out. And I would encourage everybody to get this downloaded. It's readily accessible on the web. It's called Hope and Healing from the California Conference of Bishops. It was published in 2018. It's an easy read. It's only 9 or 10 pages, maybe 11 pages, written in very pastoral language. It's not deep, heavy theological terminology or concepts that maybe can be hard to grasp. This is definitely written for those of us that work in parishes, and it's in a very pastoral way. And I think the key opening statement is what I have up here, is that we need to understand that mental health is a critical component of our well-being. And also, and this is so important, that ministering to those who suffer from mental illness is, it's not some sort of nice little niche ministry we do on the side, or when we have the time, or if we have some sort of specialized people to do this. But no, it's an essential part of the pastoral care of this church. Because thinking back to that original slide that I presented earlier, so many of us, pretty much all of us, are either directly affected or indirectly affected by mental health conditions. It is an essential part of the pastoral care of the church, especially now that we're getting deeper and better insights into mental health and mental illnesses. It is something that the church needs to address. So in this guidance document, or this that with the California bishops presented to us, there were a couple different principles. And I think that's a good way to frame the discussion about mental illness, is by thinking about it in these series of 6 different principles. And this first principle is so important. The church, Christ calls us to attend to those who suffer from mental illness and provide hope and healing, spiritual healing. Is what they're talking about here. And as the big bubble shows you right there, the church is not called to be a community of psychiatrists. We're called to be a community of persistent, patient love, of persistent, patient love. And that's what we need to always, always remember, that that's our role, is attending to the spiritual life of people who live with these challenges. Meet them where they are, love them with the passion of Christ, and offer them a place of belonging, particularly in their parish community. And the second bullet there is something that I think is starting to change, but the task of the church is to love and heal without the demand for a cure. All too often, I've heard stories in the past where people with mental illnesses, particularly more serious mental illnesses, where they would come into the parish, maybe their behavior would be a little off or a little unusual, and they'd be told, well, you go over there, get your mental illness taken care of, get it under control, and then you come back here to the church, and then we'll accept you more readily. No, we need to stop that and accept people where they are without demanding a cure. If you have schizophrenia or something that's causing some psychosis and you're talking to yourself, that's okay. Come on into the church. We love and understand. But what more often is the case is that it's not some sort of serious mental illness like that, but most people are living with, illnesses that sort of come in under the radar, so to speak. You'd never know that they were living with the mental illness. They do a very good job of covering it up and hiding it and making sure that nobody knows. And those people, we need to let them know that we will accept them with their depression, anxiety, without any sort of demand for a cure. And to say it's good that you exist. That you can't say that too often. As I mentioned a couple of times now, I live with depression. Mild depression, not serious clinical depression like many of my friends do, but even with mild depression, there can be times when you wonder, is it good that you exist? Not to the point where I'm actually considering suicide, but you wonder if God loves you. You can feel alone, you can feel isolated, very depressed, and even someone as myself, who's of course very devoted and loves Christ deeply, these illnesses can still get in there and cause you tremendous distress and really distort your relationship with God. So that's one thing in this ministry that we can really do, is to help people through these rough patches when perhaps something like depression or these other illnesses are calling someone's sense of worth into question, and to remind them that not only does God know that it's good they exist and they were loved into existence and continue to exist because of God's love, but also that they know that their parish community and people within the church love them and appreciate them and want them to be a part of their church community. Because, you know, people who live with a mental illness are some of the most brave and courageous people that I know. They have so much to offer the church. Their sense of humility, their sense of love for Christ, their sense of charity is unique to someone who's experienced this sort of suffering, and it is suffering at times. So they have much that they can offer the church through this experience of deep empathy and deep understanding that maybe those of us who have not lived with some of these more serious illnesses have not experienced. So it's not just us serving them. It's all of us in this together, and people with mental illnesses have much to offer the church and the life of our parish communities. The second important principle is the church and healthcare professionals, scientific researchers should work together to improve mental health care. But as it says on the left here, psychiatry and mental health professionals have their place, but their tasks are different and complementary for those of us and the church. We need to remember what our boundaries are. What mental health treatment does is different than what mental health ministry is. So this slide is meant to outline this, and I repeat this over and over and over again when I'm talking about mental health ministry, is that we're not doing mental health treatment. We're not fixing any sort of mental health condition. That's what the professionals do. And mental health treatment, as it shows here on the right, provides a diagnosis that manifests itself in a pervasive manner throughout the life of a person. And so they're the ones that do the diagnosis, the professionals. We don't decide, oh, you have schizophrenia or you have bipolar disorder. That's not what we do. We have to restrain ourselves from doing anything like that. The treatment involves usually several professionals to guide the type of treatment: psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, counselors. Usually there's a group of people involved, monitor the medication when medication's being offered, and other medical concerns. And then the third thing there on the slide is that the goal of the treatment is to reduce the symptoms, and success is defined by the absence of the illness or distress or symptoms. You sort of want to take things away that are being impacted, want to take away the impacts of the illness so that people can live good lives in recovery. Unfortunately, the word cure is not a word that you will see very often in mental health treatment. It's more that the fact that you can manage these illnesses, you can live good lives, but it happens occasionally. But for the most part, these illnesses are a lifelong chronic illness that you have to learn to live with and learn to manage. And many people do that quite well and quite effectively. On the other hand, those of us in mental health ministry have a different role, an important role, and I would say equally important role, and a role that's been missing for all too long. Is that we provide accompaniment. We journey with others as they experience God, that we can remind them that they're loved by God and they're welcome into the church. And we in ministry provide spiritual and social support. We give them help to give people a renewed sense of meaning and purpose, because all too often people who live with these illnesses wonder if their life does have any meaning or purpose. I mean, we all, to one extent or another, go through that type of question, but all too often people with these illnesses are excluded, pushed off to the side in their communities and within their churches, and wonder if they have meaning and purpose. And we help them feel grounded in their faith and their spiritual practices, and we increase the connection within the faith community. You know, we in Scranton, we run a spiritual support group for people that live with a mental illness. And because of the nature of the illnesses, it's hard for them to get out and socialize. And this spiritual support group is one of the few places where they feel comfortable and can get out and socialize, talk about their concerns with a mental health condition, and feel embraced and loved by their spiritual community. So that's an important thing, is both the spiritual and the social support. And one of the things they say, I've heard them say more than once, is that it is so nice to come to a a place where they can talk about their mental health conditions and their faith, but they can come and talk to people who are not getting paid to listen to them talk. So often the only time mental health people with these mental health conditions can really talk about their mental health condition is when they're talking to professionals. But if they need to know that people accept them for these, and they don't have to always be talking or exclusively talking to a mental health professional. They need to know the community accepts them and understands this. And mental health ministry is faith-based and God-centered. It has to do with the presence of God and the relationship and experiencing his presence. So our task is bringing and infusing the love of Christ into the lives of people that live with a mental illness. At its core, mental health ministry is an evangelical ministry. And by that, I mean it is bringing the life of Christ, bringing the love of Christ, the mercy of Christ, and presenting it and bringing it into the lives of people who live with mental illnesses and their families. That's what we do. We don't fix it. We, of course, recommend that they get the health care and treatment they need. But our main goal is to provide spiritual care, spiritual support, so no one ever feels alone within the life of their parish community. Maybe what I'll do is, I see it's about 20 after at this point. So we've been talking for about 40 minutes now. So maybe what I'll do is take a couple-minute break at this point, and we'll get into the last three principles after the break. So I think at this point, maybe it might be a good time to take a 10-minute break or so, and we'll come back at 7:30, and then we'll continue and through the presentation and also take some questions.
All right, folks, it is just about 7:30. So we're gonna invite you to start coming back. Just a few reminders. If you do have questions for Deacon Ed, please use the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen where you can type those. Or there's also the possibility you can raise your hand. You'll see a little hand symbol that says raise hand also along the bottom of your screen. If you do that, when we get to that question and answer time, we can unmute your microphone for you so you can verbalize that question to Deacon Ed as well. So two options for those questions. Please keep them coming. But for now, I'm going to turn it back over to Deacon Ed. We're not picking up your sound again.
It's because I have to unmute it. Now you did. Now I hope
there you go.
Let me pull my presentation back up here again and get started here. So, as I said earlier, there were 6 principles. So this third principle is one of the reasons you all are here, I suppose, is that those suffering from mental illness should not be stigmatized or judged, which we talk about a number of times now. And mental illness remains poorly understood even by clergy and others in position of influence. And there's our good. What's that? Oh, okay. Let me there we go. Sorry about that. Getting the back on good solid technical footing here. So as I was saying, that the third principle is that those suffering from mental illness and that mental illness remains poorly understood by, let's see, let me make sure we got everything going good here. So yeah, principle 3, that mental illness remains poorly understood even by clergy and those of you who are in positions of influence within your parish community. I will make this admission, and I don't think it's all that startling of an admission, that when I was in formation for a deacon, I got very little information on mental health, mental illness, never talked about suicide. And I know that's the case, at least for many other members of the clergy, that we haven't gotten a lot in previous years. I think that's starting to change. I think there is in some of the current curriculum more information and education provided on this topic. But for many of us, and that's not just clergy, I mean, that's across the board, and no matter what field you're in, as a teacher or a physician or any place. There's the amount of information and education we received on mental illness was not adequate in the past, and we need to change that. So, and attending this webinar is one step in the right direction, and to destigmatize things. So there's a picture of good Pope Francis, and you know, in the past, the popes didn't talk about mental illness or mental health a whole lot. They did a bit, but not a whole lot. But Pope Francis is starting to talk about it more. This is a statement that he made on World Mental Health Day. I think it was in 2021 during his Sunday Angelus, that I would like to remember our brothers and sisters affected by mental disorders and also the victims, often young, of suicide. And he brought this out in a very merciful way. Let us pray for them and their families so that they are never alone or discriminated against, but welcome and supported. And that's a good mission statement, if nothing else, for any mental health ministry, that we remember them, pray for them, and try not to ever leave them alone. So we need, we need to take it upon ourselves to better educate ourselves. And fortunately, there are resources out there to help us do that. So this is some examples of different types of training resources that are out there to do this. There is a program from Catholic Charities of U.S., which is called Wholehearted, and it's a nice, basically a 4-part training program on trauma awareness resources, understanding what trauma is, understanding how to accompany people with trauma. It's available for free from the Catholic Charities webpage. Like I said, it's 4 segments. You can do it in one long day, or you can split it up into different segments across a couple of days or a couple of weeks. It has a facilitator's guide, a participant's guide, and it helps you to think through trauma and how it affects a person's life and how it affects a person's relationship with God and their community. So that's a good resource. There's a thing called Question, Persuade, Refer for suicide prevention, and it gives you instruction on how to ask a tough question that people often are reluctant to ask. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking of suicide? And I would encourage, we all need to get more training in that and get, I don't know if comfortable is the right word, asking that question, but at least having some confidence that you can ask that question. And if a person does happen to say yes, that they're thinking about it, that you have the confidence to help them get the professional care that they need to get through that moment of crisis. It's not like if you ask that question, someone's going to say, oh, gee, suicide, I didn't think of that. Maybe that's a good idea now that you mention it. That's not how it works. It's always good to be able to ask that question and have the confidence to ask it and help people respond. Because I tell you, I've asked that question to many people now, and most time people say, no, I'm not thinking of killing myself, but every once in a while someone does say yes, they are, and it's not my job to intervene in any sort of clinical way, but I can say, well, I care about you. Let's go get some help. And they're often glad that at least someone's willing to talk about it, because I'm sure some of you listening maybe have experienced suicidality yourself. But when you're thinking about suicide, it's always good to know that there's someone out there you can talk to about it, and they're not going to judge you, and that will help you get the care that you need. Because sometimes when you're thinking that way, it's difficult for you to get the care you need. Just like when you're having a heart attack, it's kind of hard to drive yourself to the hospital when you're in the midst of a heart attack. Same thing with suicidality. And I will say this too, I always want to say this in any type of session like this, that if you are thinking about suicide or suicidal thoughts start to become intrusive and it starts to affect you, view that as like the signs that you would view chest pains or tingling down your arms, that it's a serious condition that you need to get checked out. So I always am going to make the point, if you're thinking about suicide or something like that, there's no shame in going to a doctor and say, I've been thinking about suicide, I need some help. There's no shame in that. You would do that without giving a second thought for some sort of physical signs, for some sort of signs of a physical illness. There's no shame at all when you see signs like that and getting treated for a mental health condition. The other resources, the NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, it's It's really what it is. It's a parents. It was founded as a support group for people, for parents who support someone with a mental illness. It's a wonderful organization, been around for many decades now. There's local chapters around the country. They have lots of great resources, training materials, information on mental illness. So certainly get to know your local NAMI chapter, get to know the resources they have. They have a thing called FaithNet, where they develop resources that might be particularly helpful to faith communities. They are secular, so it's not like they're Catholic specific or Buddhist specific or whatever. They're broadly faith resources, but they recognize the importance of a person's spiritual life. So it's definitely get to know NAMI. And this one here on the bottom right here, mental health first aid. If there's one course I would recommend anyone take, is mental health first aid. The idea is just like you take physical first aid to patch someone up when there's been an accident or some sort of physical condition and get them to the hospital or get them to the health care that they need. It's the same idea with mental health first aid. It trains those of us that are lay people how to recognize emerging or worsening or crisis situations, how to talk to someone that is going through these, experiencing these conditions, and how to get them to the care that they need. It gives you the confidence to do this. And like the word I've been using quite a bit late in the last few minutes is this idea of confidence. You can do this. Any of us can do this. We can confidently assist people who live with mental health challenges, even though we might be uncomfortable doing it. And I'll show you this short.
I'm Danny. I've lived with depression and
Sounds like I
anxiety for
started
about
here.
12 years.
Give me 1 second to introduce this here. This is what's called the awkward conversation, which is about put out by Mental Health America as part of their mental health first aid and explaining what mental health first aid is all about. And they call it the awkward conversation, which is, are you ready to be able to talk to someone about their mental health condition? For many of us, it's awkward. How do you talk to someone about depression? How do you talk to someone about their anxiety? And it shouldn't be, but it is. And mental health first aid can help us get past that awkwardness. So let me show you this short film clip here from Mental Health America about how to start that awkward conversation and to further encourage you to take a mental health first aid course.
I'm Danny. I've lived with depression and anxiety for about 12 years.
Okay.
Let's start that video over again. I understand the sound was coming through, so I'll start it again.
I'm Danny. I've lived with depression and anxiety for about 12 years. And today I'm going to be opening up about those mental health challenges with some complete strangers in the hopes that we can start normalizing conversations about mental health. Hi, I'm Danny. Nice to meet you.
I'm Colleen. It's nice to meet you too.
Cecilio, nice to meet you.
How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
I'm doing really good, yeah.
Doing good. Yourself?
I'm actually not doing so well today.
Okay, that's honest.
Oh, is that all right?
Okay. So,
Okay, what's going on?
can you tell me a little bit more about it? Do you feel comfortable talking about it, or?
Yeah, I can talk about it. So I've been living with depression for a long time, and this week has been particularly hard for me. So a lot of people simply just don't know what to say and what to do when somebody opens up to them about a mental health or addiction challenge. And that's really where mental health first aid can be valuable. It teaches people a concrete action plan for starting a conversation and getting somebody the support that they need, whether that's treatment or just a non-judgmental listening ear. So was it a little unexpected when I responded that I wasn't doing well, us being complete strangers until this moment?
I'll be honest, it caught me off guard. You just expect the automatic response of, how are you doing? I'm good.
When you first meet someone, here there's like a huge distance.
I always feel like, how can I help someone else? So, and I know it's hard because you just want to be like, oh, sorry, okay, let me run,
And I don't think people do it because they're inconsiderate. I think it's because they honestly just don't know what to say.
Have you talked to anyone about this?
Sometimes I just don't want to burden. Yeah.
I know it feels like that, but most of the time people want to help.
Yeah.
Like everyone kind of wants to be useful to other people, so they want to help you. So don't feel like you're burdening them.
That was really, really nice.
That's so sweet. I totally wanted to give you a hug, and then I was like, that might be weird, but okay.
No, that was exactly what you should have said.
Myself, I was thinking okay, this person is in need of help. Try your best. Listen to them. Sometimes that's the best thing you can do is just listen.
If you had cancer, you wouldn't just try to you wouldn't will yourself to get better with that. And so I hope that people just start talking about it more.
Wouldn't it be refreshing if we could take off the mask?
Yes, absolutely. Be real people.
So how did you learn how to respond that way?
My father committed suicide when I was young, and it was like a really pivotal change. And I think I spent most of my life trying to avoid that and avoid talking about that and the shame and the guilt. So I really made this decision to learn how to interact with people and be empathetic and show people that someone does care about them even if I don't know you. I think people should just ask more questions because it's once you get to know the person and understand that it could literally be any of us, any of us could have this at any point in our lives, how could you make a judgment on it?
Can I give you a hug?
Well, absolutely. I love hugs.
Thank you.
So that's a good film, The Awkward Conversation. And like I said, it's based on mental health first aid, and mental health first aid gives us the confidence to do that, to be able to talk about it. As church leaders, we need to be able to talk about our mental health and mental illnesses. And I'll tell you this, you've heard me mention my depression and certainly talk about Katie. And I'll tell you, even the Pope Francis talks quite a bit about his mental health condition. He's lived with anxiety for many, many years. And he first got treatment for it in the 1970s when he was under a very difficult, oppressive government regime in Argentina at the time. And he was under great stress leading his Jesuit community at the time. And he still talks about the importance of the psychological and psychiatric care he got. And he still, has to manage his psychological condition in a way that the Pope Francis, he has a beautiful way of talking, and he talks about it's a condition that he'll have for life, and you have to learn to caress your mental health condition. You have to learn to caress it because it's something you live with. It's something you have to understand, and I just think that's a wonderful way to express it. Is that you caress it. You live with it, and you don't have to put it under the rug or anything like that. You caress it. You take care of it because it's not going away, and you can find the treatment and care that you need to take care of these things. So you can talk to people about these. You can talk about these conditions yourself. So this fourth principle can be a difficult topic for many of us. But it's an all too common issue that comes up, which is those impacted by suicide need our compassionate response. Obviously I know Scott, who started off earlier today, knows about it. His son died by suicide. My daughter died by suicide. And suicide, as I'll show some of the statistics here in a minute, is a much more common way to die than many people realize. So in our parish community, we need to be asking ourselves these questions. How can I communicate God's mercy and love when there's been a suicide? What can I do to walk the long road with people who are grieving a suicide? Because it is a long road. It's really something and it's not just suicide, but suicide in particular. Those of us have lost a loved one. In some ways, we grieve for the rest of our lives because we miss them. So it's a long road, a long walk. And what moments of prayer can my parish offer, particularly for suicide? Because particularly for those of us in the Catholic communities, this issue of suicide has been particularly stigmatized because of some of the misunderstandings about suicide, which I'll get into here in a moment. But suicide, it's good to know what the statistics are. This is actually a little dated now. The suicide rate now is up approaching 50,000 people per year and up over 130 suicide deaths per day. So if today's a typical day in the United States, this many people are going to, on average, die from suicide. So pray for them and for their families, because it is such a difficult way to lose someone. This shows you a map of some areas of the country where suicide rates are lower and higher. And as you can see, through the Rocky Mountain states and the rural parts of this country, suicide rates are quite high. And you get to the coasts, particularly like New York and California, Jersey, along the coastal areas, they're lower. Still not low enough, but they're lower. I can see Minnesota there somewhere to the low to mid-range side of things. So you can speculate as to why it varies from one place to another. No one knows for sure. I'm sure it has partly to do with the accessibility of good mental health care resources and therapists to help with this. The accessibility to lethal means. Guns are the leading cause of suicide, at least in this country. And so there's all sorts of reasons, but it does vary from place to place. And professionals are researching this and trying to understand why some places have higher rates than others. And also the table on the right here shows the age range of people who have died by suicide. And, it affects every age group. It's not like any age group gets a pass on this. Those of us that are, in fact, the highest suicide rate actually is for middle-aged white guys, has the highest suicide rate in the country by age, at least, is the highest suicide rate. There are some Native American communities that also have extremely high suicide rates. But many people tend to think it's an issue that's particularly or unique just to young people. And young people, of course, far too many die by suicide. And we need to get those suicide rates down. And it's certainly a particular tragedy when a young person dies by suicide because they have their whole life ahead of them and it's cut short. But I tell you, suicide affects all age groups, even up into the outer years of 75s and 80-year-olds. You can see that suicide is, nobody gets a pass on it. Everybody has to deal with this, and we should keep that in mind as we provide these ministries and support that it's a widespread and way of people die. And for those of us that I have a couple of quotes here from leading what are called suicidologists. There are people in the psychiatric field who study suicide, and the term for people in that field is called suicidologists. And these are some of the leading ones: David Jobs from Catholic University in Washington, and Dr. Knock from Harvard, and Dr. Friedman from Cornell. So they're leading colleges within the country. Dr. Jobs, who I've had a privilege of talking to a number of times, wants to remind all of us that who have lost someone to suicide, that even he, as a suicidologist, cannot accurately predict who's going to die by suicide. One person with a similar mental illness, similar circumstances in life, jobs, all the socioeconomic conditions. Most people, of course, don't die by suicide. Why does that one person die by suicide? He can't predict who's going to be the one that's going to die by suicide and who's going to be the one, who are going to be the ones that live. So their fortune-telling abilities, even for the experts, is terrible. So those of us that have lost someone to suicide, or if you're grieving the death of a loved one to suicide, will go through that guilt and that sort of, what could I have done differently? And all I can say is try to let that go, because it is just something, one, you'll never get ultimately in this side of heaven, never ultimately get an answer to. But two, that, you don't know any more than the experts do, that's for sure. And just try to accept that. Interestingly, the statistic here from Dr. Knock is that the suicide rates are still high. They were high over 100 years ago. In 1914, they were about 16 per 100,000. And now in actually 2024, now over 100 years, the suicide rate is still about the same, which is an amazing statistic to see. They go up and down, of course, during the years. And actually in the 80s and 90s, the suicide rates came down quite a bit. But now they're back up to historic levels and have been sadly increasing. The rate of increase has been going up over the last few years. But over 100 years, and as Dr. Friedman says here, we haven't made much progress. We've seen death rates from heart disease and other sorts of illnesses plummet, but not for suicide. And he attributes it for the simple reason of stigma, that we need to declare a war on suicide and mental health conditions and bring these suicide death rates down and better treatment for mental illness so we can start to do a better job and take care of our loved ones and those of us that are living with these mental health challenges. So it's just an interesting statistic that things have not changed that much over the last 100 years or so in actual death rates. It's an important number to remember here is 988 when we're talking about suicide or any mental health crisis situation, but particularly suicide, is that I think starting to get better known, but of course everyone knows about 911 to call when there's an emergency like an accident or a fire or something like that. Well, there's now a number that you can call 988 when there's a need for some sort of immediate response to a mental health care crisis. I know Minnesota has a very good program with good response rates. So when you see someone that maybe does disclose to you, for example, that they are thinking about suicide and they can't get to a mental health care professional quickly, call 988 and get someone on the line that can help you and help the person experience the crisis get the care they need. 988, it is a real godsend that this country's adopted in the last couple of years. The other thing too, that in a faith community, we need to know how to respond from a faith point of view. So these are two books that I, along with Bishop Dolan, who's now the Bishop of Phoenix, wrote a couple years ago. After my Katie died, the way I started to deal with my grief was trying to read about suicide and understand suicide and understand what the church teaches about suicide and mental health. And, there really wasn't a whole lot out there, particularly in the way of books, specifically Catholic resource on this topic. So through a series of happy coincidences, Bishop Dolan and I got to know each other. And I'll tell you, just when you think you have it bad, and certainly losing a daughter to suicide is terrible. It's horrible. There's nothing that I can say that's good about it. But you always seem to run into someone that has it worse. So Bishop Dolan has lost 3 siblings and a brother-in-law to suicide. And in fact, he was installed as the Bishop of Phoenix a little over a year ago, and his sister Mary, who struggled with mental illness and suicidality for many years, died by suicide shortly after he was installed as Bishop of Phoenix. And her note that she left, encouraged him to continue to be a leader on mental health ministry. So Bishop Dolan certainly understands, and I think that also goes to show you the point I was making earlier, that mental illness affects everybody. I don't care if you're a bishop, a deacon, the parish CCD teacher, whatever, it affects everybody, and none of us get a pass in this. So Bishop Dolan and I decided one of the things that would be helpful was to provide some specific Catholic resources in this topic. So we wrote 2 books. One is a larger pastoral handbook on responding to suicide that goes into the history of the church's teaching on suicide and mental health, and it gets into some of the stories of Catholic leaders who've experienced suicide in their families and in their lives, and also then has a series of chapters on how can we respond to this, what kind of resources can we provide. So we hope it's a helpful book. It's got the Catholic not Press Association, Catholic Publishers Association Book of the Year award a couple years ago when it came out. So we were gratified to see that the Catholic publishers see this as a very needed resource It's available, online, Amazon, and any other place you get your books from. It's published by a reputable Catholic publisher, Ave Maria Press, out of Notre Dame. And the other book we wrote is a smaller book, When a Loved One Dies by Suicide: Comfort, Hope, and Healing for Grieving Catholics. And I tell you, when you lose someone to suicide, you're in shock, and you can't really read a whole lot. You can't read a book from the cover to cover, because it takes time to heal and to get over that initial shock. So we wrote this smaller book, which has a series of 9 chapters. I'm sure all you good Catholics know why it's 9 chapters. It's like a novena, and you can read each chapter, and it provides a reflection by a Catholic leader who's lost someone to suicide, myself, Bishop Dolan, Melinda Moore, who's a psychologist who lost her husband, and Letitia Adams, who's lost their son. So there's a number of different people from different perspectives write about their loss to suicide and how their faith has helped them heal. And I think I've been told it's very helpful, and that's very gratifying to know that it's helpful to a number of people. What we did is in addition to the books, we've also created a film series on this that can be used for grief support group programs for people that have lost someone to suicide. Because not everybody likes to read a book. So we developed a series of films on When the Loved One Dies by Suicide: Comfort, Hope, and Healing. And we have a leader's guide and a participant's guide, and it can be used to help people through this difficult time. So let me show you the trailer for this film series, and you can get the films on our webpage too.
Fran and I had twins. They were born in 1976, boy and a girl, Kevin and Carla. Carla was beautiful, literally beautiful, brilliant, creative, but she had died. And that's what launched us into suicide grief.
The day he died, he was talking to me, but I knew his energy was weird. And he said, "I love you, Mom." And that was the last thing I ever heard him say.
I lost my husband, Connor, to suicide 25 years ago, and it has shaped my life in the most profound way.
Katie lived a good life. She lived 11 years with this bipolar disorder. 3 hours after we found she died, I wrote her obituary. And it was just a short, simple obituary that said, Katie had bipolar disorder, but she was a wonderful child of God, and she's not defined by bipolar disorder.
I came to understand that Marianne, my sister, had died by suicide. And when it comes to suicide, we sometimes think of it in the abstract. We must be very careful to remember there's a person and a story, and this is very precious to God.
I was really suffering in the aftermath because I really didn't understand why God would allow this to happen to Connor, would allow it to happen to me.
If I listen really well, instead of letting the anger rage in my head and my heart, I can hear God say, "I was there and it was horrible. I loved him too."
There is a special kind of suffering that comes with suicide loss that actually the church can minister to by allowing us to know and to be reminded that Christ is always with us.
And Jesus knows all about our troubles, he knows them, he experienced them. Every sorrow, every pain, every grief that would ever be experienced by all of humanity, he experienced on that cross.
Suicide and death, as Christians, we know that death is not the end. Death by suicide is not the end. There's always the resurrection and salvation, and there's always hope. And that's the one thing that's come out of this belief that God can overcome everything.
I don't have all the answers, even though I've studied this for almost 4 decades. But I do know that within the wretchedness and the pain that comes with suicide, there's the potential to live your life differently because you knew this person, they were a part of your life, and you'll never forget them.
We remember her for her courage, because whatever her struggles, she fought.
Carla's version of the Serenity Prayer, it is our prayer, written by Carla shortly before she died. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Show me the trace of you in everyone I know. Gently turn my gaze back home toward simplicity, grace, and gratitude. Remind me that we are all imperfect, holy, and free. Open me to know and embrace your peace. Amen.
So it's a beautiful film series put together by a group called Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries. They're located out of Vancouver, Canada, and I'll show you another resource they developed that is very helpful to have these film resources. So I would encourage you to go to our website, catholicmhm.org, and you can see the links, and you can get all of these resources are free. There's no charge to use these, and download the documents if that's something you're interested in doing. The fifth principle is that we must meet and attend to those in need where they are, which is, for those of us in the Catholic world, in our parish communities. That's where they are. We need parish-based mental health ministry teams, working into the liturgy, working into the devotion to the saints. So that's what I'd like to discuss a little bit now is about how we can, some of the specifics on what a mental health ministry could look like in a parish community. This is the top 10 list, so to speak, a basic look of what a robust parish mental health ministry would look like. And in many ways, it's a simple ministry. I always say the only two main qualifications you need to be a good, solid Catholic health minister is one, a burning love of Jesus Christ, and two, a burning love to serve those in your parish community who are dealing with mental health challenges. If you got those two things, you got those two loves, you can be a wonderful parish mental health minister. So these are the 10 things, and there's much more on our webpage about this, going into much more detail. But the first thing would be form a parish mental health ministry team. Don't go this alone. You certainly need a couple people, because it can be a difficult ministry at times, and you certainly need backup and support for it. Get your parish pastor to approve it. For sure. Introduce the topic to the parish with some sort of reflection program, which I'll get into in a minute, either an in-person or maybe use some of the resources from Sanctuary to introduce the topic and get a discussion going. Another important part of this ministry is that once people know that you're offering a mental health ministry, they'll expect you to have some idea of what the resources are in the community. What are the mental health treatment centers? What hospitals? What local and regional agencies are available to help out? Again, we're not the ones that provide these sort of treatment or care, but we need to know where people can go to get these care and resources, so we can be a source of information within our parish community. We can do various parish education programs, like periodically invite a psychiatrist in to talk about schizophrenia, what it is and how it's treated, or some other mental health condition. It speaks volumes by simply having that presentation, even if it's not particularly a faith-based presentation, but having that medical presentation at the parish, because it shows the people in your parish community that we can talk about mental illness at our parish. So occasionally have some sort of education events. Special liturgies, what I'll get into in a minute. I know, for example, here in the Diocese of St. Cloud, you had a beautiful liturgy for people that are grieving the loss of someone to suicide. And there's other types of liturgies you can do and things you can even work into the normal liturgy of a parish community. Offer spiritual support groups. I talked about that a bit earlier. Support groups for people that live with the illnesses, where they can share their experience of illness and how it interacts with their faith. And I also say a spiritual support group for the caregivers, usually parents, but not exclusively parents, so that they can have a place to share and talk about their child's mental illness. Because I tell you, when your child is admitted to a psychiatric hospital because of psychosis, or there's been a suicide attempt, for most people, that's their first introduction to this issues of mental illness and mental health. They don't know how to respond to it. They don't know where to go. They think people are going to think they're bad parents because their children had a mental illness or attempted suicide. And they're in shock. So a spiritual support group for people that are supporting someone with a mental illness can go a long way to help people get past that initial shock, help them get on their feet a little bit and know what the resources are in the community and know that there's support out there for them. Other things are home visits. We visit people that are shut in because of physical illnesses. Well, I'll tell you, quite often people are shut in or don't get out because of their mental illness, because of their anxieties or social phobias or things such as that. So go visit people in their homes, bring communions to them. That's something that I think any parish can do once you know who those people are, and they're usually quite appreciative of having a visit. And of course, bringing Christ to them in the Eucharist is a powerful thing that we can do to help each other. Hospital visits. Don't be afraid to visit someone in a psychiatric unit. They're not gonna do you any harm. Psychiatric units, if anything, are pretty safe places, and they certainly need the visits. I've been to psychiatric units, and I'll tell you, they get very few visitors. So it's important to be able to establish a relationship with the local hospital where the psychiatric units are, and don't be afraid to go visit them. And the 10th thing would be is your mental health ministry team will sort of be like the resident expert on these topics related to mental health, and you can help your youth ministry or your grief support ministry or the other ministries within the parish, providing them with information and support on mental health related issues. So as you can see, it's not a tremendously complicated ministry. It's a basic, simple ministry, but as I keep saying, it's an evangelical ministry that brings the life of Christ into the lives of people who are facing these challenges. So as I mentioned, Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries provides a beautiful faith-based resource to introduce this topic into your community. So I know here in St. Cloud, you're just getting started with mental health ministry, and this is a great way in any parish community is to bring the Sanctuary for Catholics course. It's an 8-part film series, beautiful films. I'll show you a trailer for it here in a minute. Beautiful films. It has a facilitator's guide. It has participant guides. It's kind of cookbook. Anybody can do this and offer this course. And what it does is just gets the conversation going about mental health, mental illness. And the final part of the series is what can our parish do? Because every parish has different needs and different skills. So for example, I work in a Center City parish in Scranton. The needs of a Center City parish with high rises and a larger population of people who are living homeless are different than say a suburban parish with a Catholic school and lots of kids. The needs are just different from parish to parish. So it helps you think that through. So let me show you the trailer here for the Sanctuary course. And again, I strongly encourage you to consider offering this course in your parish.
I was experiencing suicidal thoughts. It would be better if I wasn't here. I'm really a burden on my family and I should just go away.
Heavenly Father, we come before you who have created us in your image and likeness.
I thought about dying. I just thought, what was the point? There's always something wrong with me. I can't be happy.
You have made us your sons and daughters.
Thoughts were going through my mind like, why are you here? What's the point?
We ask you, Lord, to strengthen us in our faith.
Nothing's wrong with you. You're being a little kid. You're being a baby. Get over it.
Continue to pour forth your healing spirit upon those who suffer from mental illness.
I was diagnosed with clinical depression. I saw that as something that was bad about me. If I just prayed hard enough and if I just did the right moves in my life, then God would take it away from me.
I think as Catholics, some of us can tend to over-spiritualize things and to underestimate the human and the natural.
When people might not fully understand the importance of mental health, they might say, yeah, well, maybe you just need to pray more, go to Mass more. If your faith were stronger, you wouldn't have these issues.
I'm a Christian, but I'm human. And if I can be physically ill, I can be mentally ill.
Too often when we're in a crisis, it feels like this is it. And if something doesn't happen right now, it will never be better. It's hard to see a way that this could be different. Hang in there, get help, because it really can be different.
I look up at the cross and I see Jesus' broken body. I know that he knows my suffering. He can understand what I've been through. He can understand what I will go through, and he's there for me.
There is a really profound truth that suffering unites us or pulls us closer to Christ.
The connection between me and the rest of the body of Christ is real. Suffering united with the suffering of Christ actually has implications for the church.
Faith is about me and God in the context of community, to be known by each other, to support each other, to help each other.
In relationship, that is where profound healing takes place. We're never called by God to walk through this life alone.
When there is a hand that can guide you through God, it will be inspiring to know that there's someone there who may be able to help you.
You're not alone. That's the biggest thing I could say is you're not alone.
So that's a beautiful program. I strongly encourage you to consider offering that in your parish, and it highlights the importance of community. The other thing, the other resources that are out there to, again, continue to give the confidence to offer this ministry is on our webpage at the Catholic Association of Catholic Mental Health Ministers. We've just launched a online learning center where you can go here, and the follow-up course would be on how to start a mental health ministry, this Introduction to Catholic Mental Health Ministry course. And then we also have courses, the When a Loved One Dies by Suicide course, and also accompany people who are grieving. And all of these courses are free, and you can log in and take these courses, and they will help build your confidence in offering this ministry and give you some very good ideas and tips on particular things that you could do. I know I'm showing a lot of films, but little previews, but I think this one is good. I'll show you this one about the Introduction to Catholic Mental Health Ministry and how to start a ministry in your parish community. I think you might enjoy this, and I think it shows the basic concepts of once you get into a mental health ministry, what you can do with a mental health ministry. So we'll take a look at that.
I went to the diocese and I said, have an idea. And the person who was vetting me, she said, oh, this sounds like mental health ministry. She put the California Bishop's letter on hope and healing in my hands. I just started crying because nobody ever told me that there were saints who had mental illness. Nobody ever told me how much God loves people with mental illness, how much the church cares for people with mental illness.
As priests, we are starting to get a better understanding of the difference between someone who's suffering from mental distress as opposed to something more spiritual.
The statistics are there and they don't lie. So many people are affected by mental illness.
We're dealing a lot with different cultures that have taught people not to seek any help for their problems, to think that this is just a cross that God wants them to carry.
If mental health issues are left alone without addressing it, nobody can enjoy abundant life.
We're not the healers. God is the ultimate healer. We're there to help connect folks with resources. This is a ministry of presence, just being present with that individual.
For many people, mental illness represents an ongoing and lifelong burden. We clearly proclaim that there is no shame in receiving a diagnosis of a psychiatric disorder, and we affirm the need for education in our communities to remove the unjust prejudice and stigma often associated with mental illness. We have the duty as Christians to reach out to the sick, to accompany them, and to do all we can to heal or diminish their suffering. As the body of Christ, we are called to help alleviate the burdens that stem from mental afflictions.
Introduction to Mental Health Ministry is a course for any Catholic who wants to bring mental health ministry to their parish or diocese. You'll learn how to increase mental health literacy, conduct a needs assessment, draw up a parish plan, and partner with other organizations in the community. You'll also hear the stories of clergy and laity who are already offering mental health ministry, and be inspired by the teachings of our Catholic faith.
I can think of a lot of people who never talked about their mental illness at church, and now they can talk about their mental illness with somebody besides God. They can know that they're not alone.
We want to get rid of that stigma so people know that they can come to church, that they're not going to be judged, that they are accepted, that they are a child of God.
Deacon Ed, we're not hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I turned
Perfect, thank you.
Unmuted. Yeah, one of the things I'm showing you these films is to bring home the point that the resources are out there. You can do this. You can start a mental health ministry in your parish. There's lots of resources, and it's a ministry that's growing within the church, and you can do this. That you can learn, and you can learn what needs to be done to be able to offer this ministry with confidence. You're not on your own. There are support out there. You can work it into the liturgy and worship, like I said, of a parish. You can work it into the prayers of the faithful. We have some examples of this on our webpage. Something as simple as just specifically praying for people who live with a mental illness and naming it out loud, praying for people that live with schizophrenia or depression or suicidality, just occasionally and on a fairly regular basis, working it into the intercessory prayers. It doesn't have to be a special thing that's only done once or twice a year, but something that's done on a regular basis. You can work it into the homilies. I think one of the best stories is how Christ saw the lepers as human beings and looked past their illness. Unfortunately, leprosy is not an illness we have to worry about these days, but back in Christ's days, leprosy was an illness that was highly stigmatized and people were seen as less than. So there's always something in scripture you can work into the homilies. The saints, Saint Dymphna, as I said, is the patron for people with a mental illness, and many other. Saint Therese of Lisieux lived with some anxiety disorders. Matt Talbot was an alcoholic. Edith Stein dealt with suicidality. Oscar Romero dealt with obsessive compulsive disorder. So mental illness is not an impediment to holiness. God works through everything, and God can, and I think, raise up these great saints so that those of us who live with mental health challenges can see that mental illness is not an impediment to having a deep spiritual life and a heroic holiness if we're called upon in that way. And working into the liturgy. I know here in St. Cloud, they had a suicide healing and remembrance last year. Perhaps in May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month in the United States, and the feast day for St. Dymphna, maybe a mass revolving around mental illness. In December, the longest night, because not everybody's into Christmas who's living with depression and these mental illnesses. So a prayer service, and it can be quite often be ecumenical, like a Taizé type chanting prayer service that acknowledges how people struggle at this time of the year and accompanies them during this time of the year. So there's many mass services that you can work into. So I'll close with this and see if there's any questions, but these are questions you can think about yourselves as you start to think about doing a mental health ministry. What are some of the obstacles in your community that gets in the way of this? And alternatively, what are some of the opportunities that would support you? And what specific steps could you take to start a mental health ministry in your community? So these are things that I would encourage you to think about. So I'll open it up to questions. I see there's a handful of questions here. So if you want to go ahead, what do we have here, Kateri?
Yeah, so the first question comes from Rose, and she asks, since COVID, I believe that people of all ages have been affected with PTSD-like, for lack of a better term, symptoms. Also, I believe that some of our technology has adversely affected our young people and even some of our older people. How can our parishes tackle these problems that have been amplified since COVID?
I would think be quite open about them and acknowledge the problems. Again, like I've been saying, is we can't treat these problems. That's what the professional community does. But this crisis of isolation and loneliness in the United States is very real. And one of the things our parish communities can do is offer these spiritual support groups and other ministries and special liturgies to acknowledge these challenges and welcome and embrace people and to come into the parish community and talk about these things, pray about them. I think that's just such an important thing to do because all of us, I don't care who you are affected by these technologies, which tends to isolate us a bit. The pandemic and the physical isolation that we had to go through during the pandemic to keep ourselves physically safe, obviously affected our mental health to a certain extent. So there's many things we can do, and I would again say offer mental health ministry, declare it from the rooftops that your mental health conditions are something that Christ is concerned about, and Christ wants to comfort and provide you with spiritual support.
Great, thank you. So Julie has a question. You had mentioned, Deacon Ed, that hospital visits was one of the things that a robust parish mental health ministry could look like. Julie asks, how would a parish handle the privacy concerns when trying to visit like a psych ward, an IRTS, or a group home? She said it's a great idea, but is it practically possible for some parishes?
Yeah, you would, like you would visit any other hospital facility. The HIPAA laws apply. Now, the privacy laws apply to any unit. But I can tell you this, I mean, you would ask the patient if they would want to visit. Just like you would with any other parishioner, but I would treat it the same way as you would treat any other hospital visit. Just find out if the parishioner wants to visit, and then go there and visit them. In a good parish community, there would not be any shame if their loved one was admitted to a psychiatric unit. They would be asking for a visit, just like they would ask for a visit if they're in the hospice unit or getting treatment for cancer. So all I can say is treat it the same way you would any other hospital visit, and know that when these visits occur, that people pretty much to the person that I visited appreciate the visits, and that helps to break down the stigma and helps to people to realize that you're okay. They have a mental illness. That's okay. We still love you. We welcome you, and we want to support you.
To that point, we have to work hard as parishes to make sure that our parishioners know it's okay to ask for themselves or their loved ones to be added to the prayer list in the parish for if it's a mental health concern, just like they would ask for prayers for a loved one who has a physical illness or injury.
I'm happy to say our parish has Scranton has a prayer list, and quite often now people are comfortable asking to pray for a loved one who's dealing with mental health challenges. Yeah, absolutely. Prayer, definitely.
Questions, again, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, or you could push the raise hand feature also, and we can call on you.
Okay, well, if we don't have any more questions at this point, I'll let the Pope do a little advertisement for our association, so to speak, and let Pope Francis have the last word. So I would certainly encourage you to go to our website, consider joining the Association of Catholic Mental Health Ministers. All of this is free. We're not trying to do fundraising at all, so don't worry about that. We're just trying to build this ministry in the church and build a network of ministers so we can share ideas. It's not like I know everything about mental health ministry. It's a new ministry. And certainly as people carry this ministry out around this country, and now we're working around the world, as people carry out this ministry, we need to be able to network and share ideas. So go to our website and consider joining it. But even if you don't want to join, go through our website and take any of the resources we have there, and please feel free to use them. There's no copyright or charge in any of these things. We just want to provide resources to grow this ministry. And, follow us on all the social media platforms. We try to get the word out and keep information out there ruling about mental health ministry within the church. And the other thing that we do is we work with the Pope's Worldwide Prayer Network. And as you probably know, the Pope has a monthly intention. The popes have been doing this for centuries, where they have a monthly prayer intention for one issue or another. And we started working with the Pope's Prayer Network to take the monthly prayer intention and do a day of reflection on mental health. And the second Monday of the month is Mental Health Day on the Pope's Prayer Network. So for example, when the prayer intention was for teachers, we talked about the mental health needs of teachers and their students. This upcoming month, it'll be about martyrs in the church, and to pray for the new martyrs. So we reflect on how, like I discussed briefly in the presentation I just made, how many saints within the church live with a mental illness, many martyrs lived with a mental illness and lived lives of heroic virtue. So that's what we do. We work at the Pope's Prayer Network. There's a picture. I had the honor of meeting the Pope a couple weeks ago, gave him our book on how to start a mental health ministry, Catholic mental health ministry guidelines for implementation, which is also free on our website. You can download it for free, or you can order a hard copy, which we have to charge for the hard copies. I think about $20 or so. But we'll ship you a hard copy, or you can just download the PDF for free. And we offer these prayers every month. That's the sort of thing you can put in your bulletin that's available on our website. And if you become a member, we email these prayers out well in advance, so you can put them into your parish bulletin as a way to build awareness for your parish-based mental health ministry. They change every month, like I said, based on the Pope's prayer network. And it's always good to know, or to reassure people that your ministry is known and appreciated by Rome, that it is something that Rome recognizes an important ministry. There's also where you can find it is they have apps, Click to Pray. There's a blog, there's a web page, and I'll just tell this one brief story. So all of you good Catholics can appreciate this. So about 2 years ago or so, I got this email from this, and we all get these junk emails. I got this email from someone named Andrea, purporting to be from Rome, from the Vatican, and wanting my help, and then putting together the Pope's prayer for the month. It was the first time he was doing a prayer on mental illness, specifically on depression. And I thought, well, this is a joke. I'm just a deacon in Scranton. Who's the Vatican's going to be contacting me? Well, it turned out they were contacting me, which was good. I mean, obviously I'm glad I can help. But on the other hand, it was like, really, this is all you have to reach out to as a deacon in Scranton? So it goes to show the mental health ministry is still in its infancy in the church. So I was glad to help out. I was a little shocked they called me, but I was glad to help out. And so I'll let the Pope have the final word here tonight on our presentation. I think his presentation and reflection on depression and mental health issues related to depression is just absolutely beautiful. I'm, of course, a little biased because I helped work on it, but I still think it was, I'm sure you'll agree with me that it's absolutely beautiful. So let me show you this prayer that the Pope had for people that live with depression. And we'll like I said, let the Pope have the final word here in tonight's presentation.
La sobrecarga de trabajo, el estrés laboral, hacen que muchas personas experimenten un agotamiento extremo, un agotamiento mental, emocional, afectivo y físico. De ahí la tristeza, la apatía, el cansancio espiritual terminan por dominar la vida de las personas que se ven desbordados por el ritmo de la vida actual. Procuremos estar cerca de los que están agotados, de los que están desesperados, sin esperanza. Muchas veces escuchando simplemente en silencio, porque no podemos ir a decirle a una persona, no, la vida no es así, escúchame, yo te doy la receta. No hay receta. Y además, no olvidemos que junto al imprescindible acompañamiento psicológico, útil y eficaz, las palabras de Jesús también les ayudan. Me viene a la mente y al corazón, venid a mí, todos los que estáis fatigados y sobrecargados, y yo os daré descanso. Recemos para que las personas que sufren de depresión o agotamiento extremo reciban apoyo de todos y reciban una luz que les abra a la vida.
So that, I think in his closing phrase there sums up what we try to do in mental health ministry, is offer people a light that opens them up to life. Hope has a wonderful way of phrasing things in a very succinct way. So thank you all for listening to me, and more importantly, thank you for considering and thinking about offering a mental health ministry within your parish. And like the Pope said, this is a good ministry that can offer people hope and offer them a light, as he said, that opens them up to life. So thank you all, and God bless.
Thank you, Deacon Ed, for spending time with us for your wonderful presentation tonight. Thank you all for taking time to be with us to learn more about mental health ministry, and our Catholic response. Just a reminder that tonight's webinar was recorded, and we invite you all to watch for a follow-up email that will be coming with the recording, along with some of the links and the resources that Deacon Ed shared. So do watch for that. Once again, remember to visit our Diocesan Mental Health Ministry page for more resources, or to learn how you can be involved, how you could bring this ministry to your parish with all that information Deacon Ed shared, or just if you want to reach out and learn more or connect. And then one final reminder to please, as Deacon Ed shared, remember the new 988 resource. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health challenge, whether it's a crisis or you just have questions, that 988 is a fantastic resource to help you navigate that situation. So remember that, watch for that and many other resources in that follow-up email. And that's all we have for you. Thank you all again. God bless. Good night.